Hello, and welcome to Remote, the Connected Faculty Summit. I'm Jenny Atwood with Every Learner Everywhere, and I'll be moderating today's session. The 3 half-hour sessions in this 90-minute Ask the Experts block are sponsored by Every Learner Everywhere, a nonprofit network that advocates for and supports institutions in achieving equitable outcomes in U.S. higher education through advances in digital learning. This first block of 4 Every Learner Ask the Expert session blocks focuses on students. Our final session with this Every Learner Ask the Expert block is Achieving Academic Transformation Through Faculty Communities of Practice. And our presenters are Mike Brokos and Susan Adams. Susan Adams is the Associate Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream, where she manages programs and projects designed to build institutional capacity, innovation, and meaningful engagement of full-time and part-time faculty in their professional development efforts in teaching and learning that support equitable student success. Susan produces dynamic thought leadership around equitable instructional design strategies that contextualize student success work to colleges' teaching and learning efforts by connecting institutions to best practices, peer institutions, college examples, and resources. Susan earned her MED in Student Affairs Administration from the Woodring College of Education, Western Washington University, and a BA in English Literature and Women's Studies from the University of New Hampshire. Mike Brokos is a program manager at the Personal Learning Consortium at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. In this role, he leads projects and initiatives focused on digital learning, equity, and evidence-based teaching. His previous experience includes instructional and program leadership roles at Johns Hopkins University and Carnegie Mellon University. Mike and Susan, the floor is yours.
Thanks everyone for joining us. So Susan and I will be discussing a specific disciplinary communities of practice initiative that we helped to design and facilitate, and maybe offer some insights for others who may be interested in convening a similar faculty learning community or faculty community of practice. So just as an overview of what we're going to be discussing, we're going to define communities of practice and why they're valuable. We'll talk about how we designed ours for emergent learning and how we captured both discipline-specific insights as well as cross-disciplinary insights. And then we'll discuss some of our lessons learned and takeaways from designing and facilitating the faculty communities that we worked with. Okay. So a definition of a community of practice that's useful is a group of people who share a concern or passion for something that they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. I think that's pretty axiomatic, but 3 specific components that were important to us. First, that there's a shared domain of interest, so a common theme or purpose that that the group convenes around. Also, that the communities engage in joint activities and discussions, so that they're built around that kind of structure, and that the participants help each other out with problems, share information and resources. Also, that the practice part of community of practice means that participants are practitioners, right? So this is not just about discussion, but it's also about action planning, about developing a shared practice and actually building knowledge together in addition to just sharing knowledge. Okay, so we wanted to share a quote from our colleague, Dr. Kristen Ziska-Strange, who is an instructional designer. She's a program leader at Tufts University, and she also works for the Online Learning Consortium, which is one of Susan and I's organizational partners. Chris helped us with this initiative. So Chris says, a community of practice essentially divides the work of value evaluation and helps you to focus on what you need. Furthermore, there are too many places to find information and it's too much to try to determine the value. So there's just an overwhelming amount of information and resources and suggestions out there. Communities of practice really help you to sort of adjudicate which ones are useful for your specific purpose and your specific contexts with a group of like-minded peers. So we thought this quote was really, really powerful and helpful for us.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we started, right? So from an instructional design perspective, we wanted to have a foundation of understanding about how other people have actually designed communities of practice. So we gathered information from Tony Bates, who wrote a book on teaching in a digital age. And this helped us to wrap our heads around how to design for what I like to call emergent learning and co-creating knowledge. Tony uses the notion of designing for evolution, which he defines as ensuring that the community can evolve and shift in focus to meet the interests of the participants without moving too far from the common domain of interest. So we also wanted to make sure that we built in opportunities for that open dialogue and varying perspectives. So today we're going to share how we did that technologically with asynchronous spaces and how we designed our live spaces, but also how we created a domain of interest and how we kept there. And I do want to apologize for the background noise. It was unavoidable today, so hopefully you can still hear me. The next slide talks about our purpose and structure. So our structure included monthly live sessions and a dedicated asynchronous space to share resources and capture emerging ideas. We designed it so it became a living and breathing asset for participants to take away with them. So the primary focus was not to continue the conversation online in the Canvas site, but to build an asset, which we'll show you a bit later. And we're going to got some screenshots of that. So in addition to a structure, was discipline specific, we created discipline specific groups that were given regular and consistent time to contemplate the content together with a focus on contextualizing content in their disciplines. So essentially we had 20-minute presentations at the beginning of the 2-hour session, but then we got them right away into breakout groups to give them that opportunity to really take that content, digest it, and contextualize it specific to their discipline. And that proved extraordinarily valuable to really give them that reflective and contemplative time they often don't get to have with their peers in a discipline-specific way. So on the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the design features. So we focused on creating opportunities for engagement with a blend of discipline specific, and when they came back to the main group, they got to do some interdisciplinary sharing out, right? And noticing sort of the through line that might happen for some of these strategies across multiple disciplines. We also had participants do direct, to co-create knowledge together. That emergence naturally happened, right? So we had facilitators that were helping to capture what was discussed and to allow that to be then possibly brought into a solution or a project, an action-based research project. And then all of that was captured in the Canvas site for people to reference, look back on, and continue to build on session after session. We wanted also to have a sense of active curation of content. That's what a community of practice is. Is this a good set of content? Do we need something more specific or deeper, or is this really relevant to us? And then again, that allows us to tap into the collective knowledge of faculty to drive the development of assets and resources for the field as a whole. And that's what was so exciting about how we did this. And we wanted to have differentiated levels of participation, right? Just like differentiated instruction, we wanted to have asynchronous digital spaces, ample workshop time in small groups, and then limit time spent presenting content, right? So it's not just digesting content, but really getting into the pieces of it. And then, getting back to Tony Bates, he really offers, wanted us to offer different levels of information and discussion to engage practitioners with different problems and levels of experience with the same discipline. And it was important in the beginning that we set that clear expectation that this is active engagement, active involvement, and really giving the topics up front with guiding questions to help the cognition of all the peers, of all the practitioners, and offering that a kind of a clear curriculum of how we're going to do this. And that allowed people to come back and be ready to go for the next session and kind of build on each one. And so that facilitator piece was really, really important. And the facilitators were faculty in their discipline, right? So that also was a design feature for this particular community of practice. And back to you, Mike.
Yeah, so as Susan and I have both mentioned, the communities were kind of built for evolution, built to evolve and develop. And so it didn't make sense for us to have strictly defined outcomes when we were planning these live sessions and these communities as a whole. So instead, we started with a sort of set of themes and essential questions that kind of guided the development of our content and programming. So we had overarching themes for the 2 semesters that we set up for the communities of practice. In fall 2021, our theme was getting to know our students, increasing engagement in digital learning environments. And in spring 2022, the overall theme was developing critical engagement in and across our disciplines. Some underlying and intersecting themes, kind of the genesis of these communities and the heart of a lot of the work that Susan and I do, were evidence-based teaching practices, centering and integrating equity into course design and pedagogy, and then effectively leveraging digital learning and educational technologies. And some of the essential questions that we started with were: how do we inhabit a digital learning space that promotes equity and inclusion in our disciplines and that facilitates the equitable achievement of learning outcomes? And how do we create a digital learning space that invites interaction, collaboration, and belonging? So these were kind of the guiding principles that we used to structure our programming and our discussions. In terms of our specific live session topics, as Susan alluded to, we had monthly live sessions. They were on Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern. And we had 3 in the fall and 3 in the spring. So in the fall, we had a session focused on equitizing your syllabi, a session focused on diversifying and being flexible with the way that you assess students and being caring and empathetic. Third session of the fall was about integrating self-awareness, metacognition, and transparency. And then in the spring, our sessions were focused on sharing discipline-specific resources for building critical engagement, implementing open pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching practices, and then supporting instructors and students as agents of change and sort of helping faculty to connect students with the social justice issues within their disciplines.
Great, so now we're going to take
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
So now we're going to do a little tour of some screenshots of the digital space. So a lot of people are very interested in what does this actually look and feel like. So going on to the next slide, you'll notice here that what we did is we had a Canvas site, but then inside of the Canvas site, we did iframes with a Google Sheet, which allowed the faculty and the participants during the live session to actually populate content with prompts inside of a Google document. And they were able to make comments with each other, but we designed these Google documents with tables, as you can see, that allowed them to write down what their discipline was, what their idea was. So we created essentially community libraries, right, of resources and also community strategies based on certain topics. So that helped us begin to build assets. So again, between live sessions, the chances of people going to Canvas and going to an asynchronous space is pretty minimal. So why force that, right? Most of the building and the connecting and the co-creation of knowledge is going to happen during the live sessions. So we really wanted this space to be more relevant and meaningful and helpful to really capture those ideas. So both participants and facilitators would populate these Google documents, but they would be able to access them during the live session, even though they were in the asynchronous space afterwards. So that really created that alignment and that aha moment of this is where I can capture knowledge. This is where I can co-create assets for the whole field. The next slide shows Miro. So we use that as a technology to have basically a digital whiteboard space. And I would say Miro is one of my favorite technologies, although it can be a little bit complicated to use. But if you give clear instructions, you can see here we had a ton of sticky notes and each discipline had their own board and they were able to answer questions. And when they're in their breakout groups, they went to these Miro boards and the facilitators helped them capture information and ideas and start to bring things together. And then again, these Miro boards were uploaded to the Canvas site, so building a nice, robust asset for the whole community of practice as we went along.
Yeah, and so Susan mentioned that the facilitators were a really important component of our communities of practice, the structure. So yeah, we were grateful to be able to hire 8 total faculty leads or faculty facilitators. So we had 2 facilitators within each of the 4 disciplines that we focused on, which were chemistry, writing, math, and biology. And within each of those groups, we had one 2-year instructor and one 4-year instructor as a facilitator. So that structure really was beneficial to us because we were able to represent the perspectives of both community colleges and four-year colleges. Our participants were from a variety of institutional types as well. So the lead or facilitator structure, really helped people to feel comfortable and to make sure that they were represented, that their voices were heard and their perspectives were represented in the programming that we developed. Facilitator impact is hard to overestimate. It proved essential to incorporate faculty and disciplinary perspectives into the session planning and delivery. I'll talk about that a little bit, I think, on the next slide. But just getting the facilitators involved throughout the process was really important. One quote from one of our writing facilitators, Dr. Elizabeth Sanders Lopez, she said that the energy was very good. The structure of the sessions worked well for focused conversation and cross-disciplinary idea generation. So some of our biggest takeaways or insights and opportunities that we wanted to share with you all. First, that closer collaboration with and integration of the faculty facilitators really enriched our session topics and discussions. So throughout the 2 semesters that we worked with the faculty facilitators, initially we had them involved as the people who led the discipline-specific breakout sessions during our live sessions, and they continued to do that throughout the 2 semesters. But we also realized it was critical to involve them in our planning meetings and to help us develop our programming in general. And we also had the facilitators share during our interdisciplinary portions of our events as well, not just serve as leaders of the discipline-specific breakout groups. So the more that we involved the facilitators, we found that the more enriched our session topics and discussions were. Secondly, we felt that our session design and structure was a really successful fit for our participants. As I mentioned, we had monthly 2-hour sessions. And as Susan alluded to, we had the general structure that we adopted for each one of our 2-hour live sessions is that we would start with a short presentation to the whole group about the topic of interest, whether it was equitizing your syllabus or supporting students and instructors as agents of change, whatever the topic was. Then we would ask our faculty facilitators to share examples of specific, teaching lesson plans or approaches that they adopt in their classrooms. Then we would have breakout sessions where within their specific disciplines, participants would discuss their issues and problems, work on the collaborative documents that Susan mentioned together. And then we would come back to the whole group and sort of share across disciplines, talk about how to, for example, how an approach that was discussed in the math community could be adopted in a writing classroom, for example. And we would sometimes do this several times within a session. Sometimes we would have 2 breakout rooms followed by 2 sort of cross-disciplinary share-outs. But we felt that structure worked really well. Third, we thought that we did have a sort of issue where attendance was higher at the beginning of each semester and kind of dropped off as the semester went on, which makes sense because, the semesters get very busy with teaching and grading. But we felt that we could increase engagement and attendance with more intentional action planning and also with more intentional community building. So an example of the action building piece or the action planning piece would be, if we have a session about equitizing your syllabus, maybe during the next session, we ask the participants to come back with a revised syllabus and to seek feedback on it. So just to have some sort of assignment or deliverable that sort of gets woven throughout the semester and that people work on. We think that would be one way of sort of building coherence and community. And another thing is that we felt that, if we were doing this again, we would want to incorporate more low stakes discussion and just sort of check-ins. We tended, when we started our sessions, to sort of jump right into the meat and substance of the topic. But it might have been easier for people to get to know each other if we just sort of started out by saying, how is everyone feeling? What are you thinking about? What are you concerned with? What kinds of problems are you working on? We felt that before we jump right into the high stakes substantive discussion, it might be good to sort of check in with people and have them feel comfortable and get to know each other that way. And then finally, we felt that our takeaways from each session could be shared more broadly and beyond the communities themselves. So we had a lot of really great knowledge that was generated, a lot of great resources that were shared within each one of our sessions. And I think we did a really good job of sharing that back with the full group and with the people who might not have been able to attend that session. But there's really no reason why that knowledge needs to be constricted or restricted to the community itself. So we felt that we could, share on LinkedIn or share, with our colleagues on other initiatives, et cetera, a lot of the takeaways that were generated within the communities. So we just, we felt that we could have a sort of bigger ripple effect or impact overall. But yeah, so those are some of our main takeaways. Hope that gives you a sense of what we did, and hope it gets you thinking about what you might do if you're interested in a faculty development initiative such as this one. And I think we have about 10 minutes or so for questions.
Thank you so much, Mike and Susan. And I see that we do have some questions for the audience. And for everyone else, please go ahead and submit any additional questions in the Q&A tab. So to begin with, is there a platform you found that works better than others for conducting faculty learning communities?
Yeah, I can start to answer this one. I think we use Zoom as the platform for our live sessions. That worked super well for us because the breakout room feature was very conducive to the discipline-specific communities that we wanted to set up. So, we were able to just pre-create 4 breakout rooms for writing, math, biology, and chemistry, and then set it up so that participants could choose which room they wanted to enter when we did the breakouts. So I thought that worked really well. But Susan, maybe you might want to talk a little bit about the Canvas site, the asynchronous platform that we used.
Yeah, I think it could be utilized in any learning management system. It's a great tool that you likely already have at your institution. I tend to like Canvas. It's got a clean interface to me, but Blackboard, Moodle, and Brightspace now are also opportunities. So whatever's existing on your campus can also be a helpful tool since faculty are already there. You're teaching and learning center. Your instructional designers could help set up kind of that home or master shell there to help support a community of practice on your campus.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I would mention is the collaborative documents that Susan referred to. We use Google Docs and we use the Miro boards. Those tools were super important for sort of structuring and capturing knowledge from our discussions instead of just having them be discussed and forgotten about.
Well, we actually had a question. If you could speak a little bit more about the Miro boards and how it works and how you've been able to use it successfully.
Yeah, the Miro boards are best utilized when you have a really strong prompt, right? So you want to direct people with a relevant and meaningful question. And then that allows them to, and then the second element is giving them at least 3 to 5 minutes of quiet time to actually populate it with the sticky notes and watch that sort of emerge. And then you really want to have the facilitator look at that and come up with a summary statement to then direct the conversation and guide it. But again, it's a canvas, it's a blank canvas. So you can create whatever you want and design it in so many creative ways, but you want to help guide it cognition, right? You want to help guide faculty's thinking, help guide connections that you see, themes that are emerging. And that's what's the beautiful thing about it is here we are, have a canvas together and we all have the same paintbrush, right? And we get to sort of paint it together and have things emerge. So anything goes with the Miro board, and that's what makes it so beautiful. So it would take kind of a group of thoughtful, I would not do it in a vacuum, just yourself, but to really work with another person as a thought partner to help design what that set of questions might be, what that set of activities might be for using those sticky notes or using kind of an area for them to add text like inside of a Google Doc.
Wonderful. Okay, so our next question. What is the best time of year to run a faculty learning community, and ideally, how often should they meet?
Yeah, I think that depends on the nature of your community. We are, our initiative was about connecting faculty across lots of different institutions and several time zones. So we felt that Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern worked well because it was not too early on the West Coast, and not too late. And the Friday worked well. A lot of people don't teach on Friday, even though there are obviously exceptions to that. So yeah, that's what we did during the first semester, and then we decided it worked well, so we continued. I think it definitely would depend on your context. If you are getting instructors together just at one institution, you could probably pay more attention to their teaching schedules, and maybe you would want to, just so that you're giving everyone an opportunity to participate, you might want to have it at different times. Maybe some of them are on Tuesdays and some of them are on Fridays, just so that you can sort of work around everyone's teaching schedules. But yeah, that's just one example. But I think it's really context dependent.
Okay. Now, what are some of the constraints that you've met in constructing your communities that future educators should avoid in creating their communities of practice?
That's a good question. I mean, one of them that I mentioned was just getting people engaged and getting people to participate throughout a semester. So I think that having really dedicated communication and messaging when you're starting up the communities, as well as when you're sort of reconvening them, is important. One thing that we kind of expected was to have the same, we had 2 semesters of these communities of practice. We kind of expected to have many of the same participants across the 2 semesters. And instead we had like 2 wonderful groups, but only 10 or 15% of the people who attended in the fall continued to attend in the spring. So that, I guess one constraint from my perspective was, trying to redouble the outreach at the beginning of the next semester to try to ensure that people come back. So that, yeah, just one example of a constraint that occurred to me.
I think the other constraint is really, how do we articulate the value of a community of practice, right? Even the word itself, I think, to me, is a great word, a community of practice. I think it's even stronger than a faculty learning circle. But what do people understand that to be in their own context? And again, sort of promoting that on your campus, to me, the constraint is the relationship building that we need to have, and the trust building to say, am I really going to spend 2 hours with you every month? And, what am I going to get out of that, right? So we really do have to kind of market it in a way, and also gain that trust, create a culture on the campus that invites that this is going to be something that's thriving and generative for you, and it's not going to be numbing and consumptive, is what I often say. And how do we strike that balance, and how do we share that with people, is the constraint that I think we really had to get people actually involved and finding value in it.
Nice. Okay, so likely our last question of the session is, do you recommend offering faculty a stipend or some other incentive to be part of the community of practice? And another part is, how do you re-engage faculty who've maybe dropped off?
I would absolutely say stipends are really, really important. And obviously we all would love that. We can't do a big buffet lunch anymore, right? In so many ways. So a stipend would be a great thing. So I would say yes to that. And the engagement question, I would say, as long as it's relevant and meaningful, right? So when they feel connected to the content and they feel like they're actually going to get real solutions and feedback that's responsive to their context, that's going to motivate them to come back and re-engage. And that's why having the facilitators be discipline-specific facilitators in our case, but also well-trained facilitators that can be responsive in the moment, so that people feel heard and they feel a part of it, is really key to me, or one strategy that can super help people coming back and to stay highly engaged.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the only thing I wanted to say is that we were able to offer a stipend to our facilitators. I think that went super well. They were engaged throughout the semester, and we couldn't have done it without them. They sort of made each session. We would love to have been able to offer a stipend too to all of our participants. from a lot of different institutions. What we were able to do is offer them a digital badge, and I think that was somewhat helpful in getting them to attend and engage. But yeah, overall, if the resources are available, I think it's definitely a good idea to compensate people for their time and for what they will learn.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much, Mike and Susan both. And thank you to everyone who has attended this session. Now we're taking a break so you can explore the event. Be sure to check out our partner hall to access valuable resources and engage with sponsors, as well as the networking lounge to mix and mingle with attendees. We encourage your participation in themed networking chats that align with today's topics. And again, thank you so much.